Hi everyone, a lot has been happening in my life lately, and I'm at a point where I don't even know how to process it all. I thought sharing it here might help me sort through the mess and get some much needed clarity. I'm really hoping that putting everything out there will help me feel better, even if just a little bit. I grew up in what I believed was a typical, loving family. My parents were married for over 30 years, and we were a close-knit unit. My mom was the glue that held everything together, and my dad was the strong, silent type who worked hard to provide for us. My mom's passing was unexpected and hit us all hard, but it devastated my dad the most. He was utterly lost without her, and I could see the loneliness eating away at him. About a year after Mom passed, Dad met someone new. I was happy for him at first. I wanted him to find love again, and I thought this new lady, Jenny, might be what he needed to start healing. Jenny was around Dad's age, divorced, and had 2 kids from her previous marriage. Her kids were in their late teens and seemed like decent enough people. When Dad announced that he was going to marry Jenny, I wasn't entirely surprised. They had been dating for a few months, and I figured it was only a matter of time before they made things official. It definitely felt very hurried at that time, but I wasn't going to trouble Dad with my ifs and buts. All that mattered was that he was happy. After the wedding, Dad and Jenny moved into her small apartment with her kids. It wasn't ideal, but it was what they could afford at the time. I continued living in the house that had belonged to my mother, the home I had grown up in. It was a place filled with memories, both good and bad, and I found comfort in the familiar surroundings. I thought I would have time to adjust to the new dynamics in our family, but things changed quickly. Jenny's apartment became too cramped for all of them, and Dad started hinting that they needed a bigger place. He casually mentioned that my house had plenty of space and that it would make sense for them to move in with me. To be honest, at first, I was hesitant. This was my home, my sanctuary, the one place where I still felt connected to Mom. The idea of sharing it with Dad, Jenny, and her kids felt overwhelming. Reluctantly, I agreed. I loved my dad, and I wanted to support him, especially after everything he had been through. I thought that maybe, with time, we could all make it work, that we could find a way to live together peacefully. Moreover, Dad assured me that it would be temporary, just until they could find a place of their own. At first, everything seemed to be going fine. Jenny was polite, her kids were respectful, and Dad seemed genuinely happy. I even developed a good bond with her kids, Emma and Andy. But gradually, things started to change. Jenny began making little comments here and there about how she thought the house could be better organized or how certain things should be arranged. I shrugged it off at first, thinking she just wanted to make the place feel more like her home. But the suggestions became more frequent, and soon it wasn't just suggestions. Jenny started changing the furniture, redecorating rooms, and even throwing out things she deemed unnecessary. What really irked me was how she started talking to me about the house as if it were hers. She would say things like, "In my house, I prefer things to be this way," or, "I think our home could use a new coat of paint." It was subtle at first, but it became more blatant over time. I found myself constantly on edge, feeling like I was losing control of the one thing I had left from my mother. The house was supposed to be my safe haven, the place where I could hold on to the memories of her, but it was slowly becoming something unrecognizable. Every time Jenny made a suggestion, it felt like another piece of my mother was being erased. I tried to push back, to assert my ownership of the house, but Dad always stepped in, trying to play peacemaker, urging me to be more understanding. The final straw came when I found out that Jenny had made plans to renovate the kitchen without consulting me. She had already contacted contractors and was discussing designs with them as if she were the owner of the house. I was livid. This was my home, the place I grew up in, the house my mother had loved and cared for, and Jenny was treating it like it was hers to do with as she pleased. It turns out that Dad had been telling Jenny a completely different story all along. He told her that the house was technically his, inherited through my mother, and that he was graciously letting me stay there because it was my childhood home. But now that they were married, the house was essentially theirs. He had led her to believe that once they moved in, she could take charge and make the house her own, as a way of starting fresh and moving on from the past. When I finally sat down to discuss my concerns with Jenny, I was shocked to hear her perspective. She explained that Dad had assured her the house was now hers to manage and redecorate as she saw fit, and that my presence there was merely temporary. She said that since she was now the lady of the house, she felt it was her responsibility to make it feel like a home for everyone. I was floored. But I knew Jenny wasn't at fault here, it was my dad. He was the one who lied to her. So, I calmly told Jenny that this was my mother's generational home, a place that had been in our family for decades, and that my mom had passed it down to me specifically. I told her I didn't care what Dad had told her or what kind of arrangement they had, but the house was mine, and I didn't plan on changing its layout or appearance anytime soon. My mom had worked tirelessly on this house, pouring her love and creativity into every corner, and I wasn't about to erase her memory by letting someone else take over so quickly. The conversation started off calm, but as soon as I made it clear that I wasn't budging on the matter, Jenny's demeanor shifted. She went from being understanding to outright hostile in a matter of seconds. She accused me of being stuck up, saying I was clinging to the past and refusing to accept that things had changed. She said that I was living in a fantasy world, where my mother's memory was more important than the happiness of the living people around me. I was taken aback by her sudden outburst, but I tried to stay composed. I calmly reminded her again that while I respected her role as my father's wife, this was still my house, and the decisions about it were ultimately mine to make. That's when Jenny lost it completely. She stood up, glaring at me with a mix of anger and frustration, and her exact words were, "I am nothing more than a spoiled little girl who considered herself special because my mom left me a house." It didn't end there. She went ahead and said that I was so obsessed with my mother's memory that I was ruining my father's chance at happiness. She went on to accuse me of trying to sabotage her relationship with Dad, saying that I was jealous of her and couldn't stand the thought of someone else taking my mother's place. She even implied that I was trying to manipulate Dad into kicking them out, so I could have the house all to myself. At that point, I couldn't keep my composure any longer. All the pent-up frustration and anger that had been building inside me finally erupted. I made it clear that I wasn't trying to sabotage anything, I simply wanted Jenny to respect the boundaries that I had set. This house wasn't just a building to me, it was the embodiment of my mother's life and love, a place filled with memories that I wasn't ready to let go of. I reminded Jenny that I liked her kids and had allowed her and her children to move in out of respect for my dad, hoping that we could all coexist peacefully. But my goodwill didn't mean she could come in and take over the place as if it were hers to do with as she pleased. If she couldn't respect my wishes, then maybe they needed to find somewhere else to live. That's when Dad walked in, having overheard the tail end of our argument. Without missing a beat, he immediately took Jenny's side, berating me for being selfish and ungrateful. He accused me of acting like a spoiled child, clinging to the past and refusing to move on, of creating unnecessary drama where there should have been harmony. It was as if he had completely disregarded everything I had done to support him after Mom's death. All the sacrifices, all the compromises I had put my own life on hold to help him cope, and now he was accusing me of standing in the way of his happiness. Dad's words cut deep. It felt like a betrayal, as though the person I had always looked up to and relied on had suddenly turned against me. I couldn't believe he was defending Jenny after everything she had said and done. It was as if he had completely forgotten that this was my house, the place where I had grown up, where my mother had invested so much of herself. But what came next shocked me even more. Dad dropped a bombshell that shook me to my core. He revealed that he had already started the process of legally transferring the house into both his and Jenny's names, effectively making them co-owners. He claimed it was only fair since they were now married and needed to have equal control over the property. The rug was pulled out from under me, everything I thought was secure suddenly felt uncertain and threatened. This was the house that my mother had left to me, a generational home that had been in our family for years, and now it was being taken away from me without my consent. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was legal and tangible, an attempt to strip me of something that was rightfully mine. In that moment of desperation, I made it clear to Dad that if he went through with this plan, I wasn't going down without a fight. I told him that I would take the matter to court if necessary. I didn't want things to escalate to that point, but I was ready to do whatever it took to protect my mother's legacy and the home that held so much meaning for me. The thought of losing the house, not just to Jenny but to anyone, was unbearable. Jenny's reaction was dismissive and condescending. She scoffed at my threat, clearly believing that I didn't have a leg to stand on. She accused me of throwing a tantrum, of being a petulant child who couldn't accept change, and of trying to manipulate the situation to get my way. But as she spoke, I could see the unease in Dad's eyes. He knew that I was serious and that this could turn into a legal battle if he didn't reconsider. I couldn't bear looking at Dad for another minute. The man who had always been my protector, the one who had guided me through life, was now standing beside someone who seemed intent on tearing down everything my mother had built. For a brief moment, I could almost understand it from Jenny's perspective. We didn't know each other well, and perhaps she didn't fully grasp what this house meant to me. But this wasn't just Jenny's doing. This was my father, the man who had loved my mother for decades, trying to take away the one thing she had left for me. He was willing to change it, to give it away, and worst of all, he was doing it behind my back. It was revolting. I couldn't stay there any longer. The betrayal was too raw, too fresh. I needed to get away from the situation before I said or did something that I might regret later. So, I made a decision. I packed a bag and left to stay at my cousin's place for a while. But before I walked out the door, I turned to Dad and Jenny, the two people who had turned my world upside down, and told them that if they didn't leave my house within a few days, I would take that as my cue to go against them in court. It's been a while now since I left, and as far as I know, Dad and his wife are still staying at my house. Every day, I'm bombarded with texts and voicemails, a relentless stream of messages that only add to the turmoil I'm already feeling. Dad's messages are filled with pleas to come back and discuss everything once again, as if we could just sit down and talk our way out of this mess. He's trying to guilt trip me, saying things like, "Your mother wouldn't want this," and asking if this is really how I want to honor her memory. His words sting because a part of me knows that he's right. Mom wouldn't want our family to be torn apart like this. But she also wouldn't want me to be walked over, to lose the home she had left for me. Jenny's messages are a different story. They're full of anger, frustration, and outright hostility. She's calling me names, accusing me of being selfish and petty, and threatening to take action against me if I don't drop this silly fight. It's as if she's trying to wear me down, to make me second guess myself and my rights to the house. But instead of breaking me, her words only fuel my resolve. Now I feel stuck like never before. I'm torn between the love and respect I have for my father and the need to stand up for myself and what's rightfully mine. Part of me wants to find a way to reconcile, to find a solution that doesn't involve courts and legal battles. But another part of me knows that if I don't fight for this now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'll regret not standing up for my mother, for the home she created, and for the memories that mean everything to me. So here I am, caught in a web of conflicting emotions, unsure of what to do next. I never wanted things to escalate to this point, but I also can't ignore what's happening. The house is more than just property to me. It's my connection to my past, to my mother, and to everything that's shaped who I am. And yet, I'm faced with the heartbreaking reality that fighting for it might mean losing my father, the only parent I have left. I'm left wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Am I being too stubborn, too unwilling to compromise? Or is this a battle worth fighting, even if it means potentially severing ties with my own father? I don't know where to go from here, but I know that I can't let this go without a fight. So, I have to ask Ida for standing my ground and threatening to take my own father to court to protect the house my mother left me. Update 1. Hi everyone, I wanted to give you all an update on what's been happening since my last post. As I mentioned before, I've been staying at my cousin Tina's place for a while now. Tina and I have always been close, more like sisters than cousins, and she's been a rock for me during this whole mess. We've been best friends since the day we were born, practically inseparable, so when I showed up on her doorstep after everything went down, she welcomed me with open arms. After I told her the whole story, Tina was furious on my behalf. She couldn't believe what Dad and Jenny were trying to do, and she didn't mince words when she said I needed to fight back. She pointed out, just like many of you did, that walking away from my house after their tantrum could easily be seen as a sign of weakness, a signal that I was too scared to stand up for myself. Tina's not one to back down from a fight, and she made it clear that I shouldn't either. She also reminded me that if I let this slide, I'd be giving them the power to walk all over me, and that's something neither of us could stomach. Tina connected me with a lawyer she knows, someone she trusts and who's helped her with legal matters in the past. We've started discussing the case in detail, and I have to say, I'm feeling more confident now than I did before. The lawyer thinks we have a strong claim, especially since we have Mom's will, which explicitly states that the house is mine. Not only that, but there's also a letter Mom wrote to me in her last days. It's a deeply personal letter, one that I've cherished since she passed, and in it, she mentions that she wants me to have the house because it's been passed down from one woman to another in our family for the last 3 generations. That letter is more than just a piece of paper. It's a testament to my mother's wishes, and it holds significant emotional and legal weight. Of course, I don't want things to get ugly if they don't have to. I'm not looking forward to the prospect of a long, drawn-out legal battle with my own father. It's not just about the financial cost, though that's certainly a concern. It's also about the emotional toll it could take on both of us. I've been thinking a lot about what my next move should be, and I've decided that before I file anything in court, I'm going to give Dad one last chance to do the right thing. My plan is to go back to the house and lay it all out for him. I'm going to tell him that he has 2 options, either he and Jenny pack up and leave, or I'll have no choice but to move forward with the lawsuit. I'm not making this decision lightly, and I'm certainly not doing it out of spite. But I can't let them take away what's rightfully mine, especially not something as important as the home my mother left me. I know this might be my last chance to resolve things peacefully, and I'm holding on to a small hope that Dad will see reason and agree to leave. But if he doesn't, I'm ready to fight for what's mine. Jenny, of course, is another story. She's been blowing up my phone with messages, most of them nasty and full of insults. She's calling me all sorts of names, accusing me of being a spoiled brat, and saying that I'm trying to ruin their lives. But honestly, I've reached the point where I don't care what she thinks of me. Her opinion means nothing to me. She's just my dad's new wife, and she doesn't get to rewrite the history of my family or take away my mother's legacy. I'm planning to visit the house very soon, and I have to admit, I'm nervous about what might happen. I'm walking into a situation that could go in any number of directions, and none of them are particularly appealing. But I'm determined to stand my ground, no matter what. This isn't just about a house, it's about my family, my mother's memory, and my own sense of self-respect. Whatever happens, I promise to keep you all updated. Thank you so much for your support and advice. It's been a lifeline during this incredibly difficult time. I'll let you know how things go as soon as I have more to share. Update 2. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I'm still reeling from what I discovered. I finally worked up the courage to visit my house, hoping maybe naively that Dad and I could have a rational discussion. I wanted to believe that there was still a chance to resolve everything without legal action, that maybe, just maybe, he'd come to his senses. But any hope I had for making things easy was dashed the moment I arrived. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed something strange. There was a car in the driveway that I didn't recognize, and for a second, I thought maybe it belonged to one of Jenny's friends. But as I got closer, I saw Dad standing at the front door with another man, someone I didn't know. The look on Dad's face when he saw me was one I'll never forget. He was clearly shocked, as if he'd seen a ghost. He started stuttering, his face going pale, and I knew immediately that something was very wrong. I demanded to know who the stranger was, and to my absolute horror, he introduced himself as a real estate agent. My blood ran cold. A real estate agent? What was a real estate agent doing at my house? The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Dad had been showing the house to potential buyers. He was trying to sell the house right out from under me, behind my back. Did he really think I wasn't coming back? Or worse, did he think I didn't care enough to fight for it? The anger that surged through me in that moment was like nothing I'd ever felt before. This was the home my mother had entrusted to me, the place where all my memories of her lived, and he was treating it like some disposable asset. I turned to the agent, and in the calmest voice I could muster, I informed him that the house was not for sale. I explained that I was the rightful owner, and that any sale would require my approval, which, of course, was never going to happen. The agent, clearly taken aback, muttered something about having been told the house was on the market. He quickly realized he'd been lied to and made a hasty exit, leaving Dad and me standing in tense silence. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but it wasn't. I stormed inside the house, and what I saw next nearly broke me. Everything had changed. All the personal touches that made the house feel like home, my mom's favorite paintings, my childhood trophies, and medals, the photos we'd taken over the years were gone. In their place were gaudy antiques and random pieces of furniture that I'd never seen before. It was as if they had erased every trace of my mother and me from the house, as if they were trying to rewrite the history of the place to suit their own narrative. I felt like I was in a nightmare, one where everything familiar had been stripped away and replaced with something cold and unrecognizable. I couldn't take it anymore. The betrayal was too deep, too personal. I turned to Dad, the man who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to honor my mother's memory, and told him that I was done playing games. I was going to sue him for fraud and property theft. I told him I had a lawyer, and if they weren't out of the house by the next day, my lawyer would be the one handling this from now on. There was no more room for negotiation, no more chances. I was through being the reasonable one. I cleaned my room and threw out all the things that had been stuffed there in my absence. I keep thinking, how had things gotten to this point? I never imagined that I'd be in a position where I had to threaten my own father with legal action, where I had to fight him to protect what was mine. The house had always been a place of comfort, of warmth, filled with the memories of my mother's laughter, her love, and her hard work. Now it felt like a battleground, a place of betrayal and loss. I couldn't help but think about how different things would be if Mom were still here. She would know what to do, how to navigate this mess with grace and wisdom. She would have been able to talk sense into Dad, to remind him of what truly mattered. But she's gone, and I'm left to fight this battle on my own. It's a lonely, heartbreaking realization, and its weight is almost too much to bear. What makes it even harder is thinking about Jenny's kids. They're innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of their mother's and stepfather's scheming. I don't hate them, I hate what their mother and my dad are doing. But those kids don't deserve to be uprooted, to lose what they've started to think of as their home. The whole situation is a mess, and I hate that they have to suffer because of the choices the adults in their lives are making. As I write this, I'm filled with a deep sense of disappointment. Disappointment in my father, in the choices he's made, and in the fact that it's come to this. I never wanted to be in this position, to be pitted against him in such a painful way. But I have to stand up for myself, for my mother's legacy, and for the home that means so much to me. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. I'm preparing for what comes next, knowing it's going to be a long and difficult road. I can only hope that, somehow, some way, we can find a way through this without completely destroying what's left of our family. But if it comes to it, I'm ready to do what I have to do. I'll keep you all updated as things progress. Thank you for your continued support, it means more to me than I can say. Update 3, hi everyone, I wanted to let you all know that after everything, Dad and Jenny finally left the house. My warning must have hit home because they packed up and moved out the very next day after I arrived. It was a relief, but also a bittersweet moment, knowing that this whole situation had come to this. Before they left, I took a moment to talk to Emma and Andy, Jenny's kids. I felt terrible that they had been dragged into this mess and wanted to make sure they knew it wasn't their fault. They're good kids, and they didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of their mother's and my dad's decisions. I apologized to them for everything, explaining that I didn't want them to suffer because of what was happening between the adults. To my surprise, Emma and Andy were incredibly understanding. They told me they didn't agree with what their mom had done either and that they knew I wasn't trying to hurt them. Their maturity in the face of all this chaos really touched me. But what really got me was when they handed me a small box. Inside were the miniature paintings my mom had made, the ones that Jenny had removed from the living room when she redecorated. I hadn't seen them since everything started and had assumed they were gone for good. But those sweet kids had saved them, knowing how much they meant to me. I couldn't help but get emotional when they handed me the box. It was a reminder that even in the midst of all this ugliness, there were still moments of kindness and understanding. To show my appreciation, I gave Emma and Andy my phone number and told them they could reach out to me anytime. I also let them know they were welcome to visit the house whenever they wanted. After all, it wasn't their fault that things had turned out this way, and I wanted them to know they still had a place here, even if their mother didn't. As for Dad, he tried to talk to me multiple times about the whole ordeal. He seemed desperate to find a way to stay in the house, even going as far as offering to sign a rental agreement. But I couldn't take that risk anymore. The trust had been shattered, and I knew that allowing them to stay, even under a formal agreement, would only lead to more trouble down the road. I explained again that there were only two choices: either I'd take legal action, or they had to leave. There was no middle ground anymore, and I wasn't going to budge. Jenny, on the other hand, made it painfully clear that she wasn't happy with the situation. She spent the last few hours in the house murmuring under her breath, slamming doors, and throwing things around in an obvious attempt to provoke me. But by that point, I was beyond caring. Her tantrums couldn't touch me anymore. As long as they got out of the house, that was all that mattered. Once they were finally gone, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The house was mine again, but it was in a sorry state. I've been slowly restoring it to its former glory, putting everything back where it belongs, and undoing all the changes Jenny had made. It's been a lot of work, but it's also been cathartic in a way. Every time I hang one of my mom's paintings back on the wall or replace a piece of furniture that had been moved, I feel a little closer to her, like I'm bringing her memory back to life in the home she loved so much. I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to move forward while honoring the past. It's going to take a while to fully restore the house, but I'm committed to seeing it through. This house is more than just a building, it's a symbol of everything my mom worked for, everything she valued. And I'm going to make sure that her memory lives on here, just as she would have wanted. I want to thank all of you for your support throughout this entire ordeal. Your advice, encouragement, and kindness have meant more to me than I can express. Knowing that there were people out there who understood what I was going through and had my back gave me the strength to keep fighting when things got tough. I couldn't have done this without you, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart.